Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining us. Welcome. I'm Jan Dalley. I'm the arts editor of the Financial Times, speaking to you from London, but we have a very international panel today. Thank you so much for joining us. So, before I introduce our fantastic panelists, a little bit of housekeeping. We'd love to receive your questions and comments. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll respond to as many of your questions as we have time for at the end of our session. There's a simultaneous translation into Mandarin. Just choose, if you'd like to listen to that, just choose your audio channel by pressing the button at the bottom of your screen. In advance of Art Basel's Online Viewing Rooms 2020, OVR 2020, which launches tomorrow, I'm joined by 4 amazing artists, all of whose work will be available and visible on the OVR. So I'm going to introduce you to them all now. First of all, we have Sadie Barnett. Born in California, and where she lives and works now. She's showing with Jessica Silverman Gallery, Simon Fujiwara, British-Japanese artist working and living in Berlin, from where he joins us today, showing with Esther Schipper, Ryan Gander, also a British artist, but with a very international reach, as far as Suffolk, I believe, and further, showing with Listen Gallery, and Ebony G Patterson, who was born in Kingston, Jamaica, has studio in Chicago, I believe, although she'll tell us later, but I believe has spent her lockdown time at home in Jamaica. And she is showing with Monique Meloche Gallery. So what we're going to do today, we have a brief hour with everybody, and we're going to reserve some time for your questions. So I'm going to show you a few images of the works of each of the artists, and then ask them each to talk about one of the images, just to give us an idea of what they've been doing during this very extraordinary lockdown time, and what we can expect to see from their brand new work. OVR 2020 is Art Basel's latest online viewing rooms, and it's dedicated to work made entirely this year. So very special, really, because it's a picture of what this strangest of all years has been like for artists that we know and love, and new artists whose work we might not know. So let's start in right away with the first set of images, please. And they are from Ebony G Patterson.
Should I begin?
Hi, Ebony, hi.
Hi, Jan.
Hi, lovely to meet you. And I gather you're at home, you called it at home in Jamaica. So you think of Jamaica as home, right?
I am, and I do think of Jamaica as home because Jamaica is home. But I split my time between here and Chicago. So I spend quite a number of months of the year here, and then quite a number of months in the States. And so as a result of that, I work in both places. And I think that my existence of like living in 2 places, what it means living in that space mentally or physically, is very common for diasporic people, whether or not we're, negotiating memories of our own, of a place that we consider as home or that our parents consider as home. And then what it means to exist in the other space that becomes the space of the diaspora. And so for me, I spent actually the vast majority of lockdown in Chicago, and then decided to come home when borders started reopening in August. And yeah, it's been really good to be home and to be able to be with my mother, who I actually refer to quite often as my first home and continued home. And so well, 2020, of course, has been a roller coaster for all of us. And just before lockdown, I was preparing for a museum show at the Contemporary Art Museum in St. Louis, which was supposed to open in the summer, and also to the Liverpool Biennial. And so I was working on really large scale work. And so the idea of moving into my very small apartment in Chicago and having to go from working at like 20 plus feet to 22 by 30 was really challenging. But the language of, I've always been interested in ideas around visibility and invisibility. And my more recent works have really been focused on the garden, and thinking about the garden as a site of power, renewal, burial, memorial, and protest. And I'm particularly interested in how the language of the garden and dress intersects, and the way disenfranchised people use these tools of beauty as a way of advocating and carving themselves into visibility.
Well, so these wonderful images we're seeing, this is effectively a continuation of series that you have begun before. Tell us a little about how you would make a work like this one. This is a collage work, or
this is a collage. Well, it's a mixed media collage, and so it's on and off paper, and it involves a number of found images, drawn or painted images. The hand at the base is painted in gouache, and then there are all of these plants that seem to be popping out or cut from the surface, and then there are pearls and what's that, gold leaf and some graphite. So at the time when I was working from home during the lockdown, I had gotten this book sometime before, and it was called the Victorian Flower Dictionary, which somebody had introduced to me from the year before, because of my interest in gardens and kind of thinking about, I was interested in plants that had poisonous properties, but thinking about the double edge of that. So how something that is also really beautiful could also end up killing you. And then as I started thinking more about those things, then I realized that so many of our domestic plants are poisonous. And then at the same time, so many of these plants that are medicinal also have poisonous properties too. So just before lockdown, well, when I was preparing, since the city was shutting down, I went to the art store and I just bought like a bunch of paper, and I came across, I guess it was a print of a dandelion, but it was a scientific drawing. And I was just, I just thought it curious. I picked up a whole bunch of them and took them home. And in thinking about the dandelion and its uses, I mean, the dandelion, it's good for purging, essentially, right? So things like diarrhea. So it's a good thing. It's good in terms of its medicinal properties for flushing. And in thinking about the moment, I just kept thinking about what does it mean, what happens when the workings of a dandelion is not enough. And so I used that illustration kind of as the base to begin these drawings and to kind of shroud or to pop up this garden on this flat plane. And then from that oozes this arm. I've been thinking a lot about how the garden or how the land really tells the truth about the histories or the spaces that we exist in. So like, so the landscape or the beauty of the landscape somehow conceals all the violence, but also too, the possibility of landscape also reveals, it also reveals the way one can solve these problems, but still what needs to happen first is an acknowledgement of the truth that rests within the garden.
Well, it looks like a very beautiful series, and I'm getting used to looking at things online, but I so long to see these in real life, and I know that they will be even more beautiful there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, can we move on to, this is Ryan. Ryan Gander, British artist. Hello, Ryan.
Hi.
Hi. So this is some very different work, black and white, abstract. Tell us what you've been thinking about. Well, have you been in Britain all the time during this lockdown time? I know you have.
Yeah, I live in Suffolk. So I live out by the seaside. So I'm pretty lucky. There's not a lot of people here. And I lived in London and other cities for years, but I got a little bit distracted with things. And I think my distractions sometimes eat me away. So I moved to the countryside with my family with the idea that I'd have more time to make art.
Mm.
I've been here the whole of lockdown. And these are all new works that I've been making during that time. So some of them were started a little bit before.
Tell us a little bit about these pieces.
This is an animatronic cat that sleeps and it breathes. It has a randomized breath to it. It's made based on sketches and studies of street cats, like alley cats in New York. That's why it's called the squatters. And each of the cats has their own personality, obviously, but they all sort of squat on a plinth of an existing historically significant artwork by another artist. So when you enter the gallery, it looks a bit like the show has been deinstalled and that the plinths are left, but the plinths reference other moments in art history. And they squat on them and they sleep, but they're very, very realistic. One of them goes in the window because you often see cats asleep in shop windows.
I've got one quite like that, only she's not animatronic.
Yeah, I always think cats are like exhibitionists when they sleep. I think they like to be watched when they're sleeping. So that's in this show that's in New York that has been...
And then something much more abstract.
Yeah, this is an acropod. So it's one of those huge concrete shapes that you get scattered on beaches that stop coastal erosion. You know the ones that I mean? They go on the beach and they break the waves. So obviously they're man-made items and they're like made to disrupt the natural cycles of the world, which is, I find, quite a weird thing. And when we think of the waves, we think of lunar cycles and things. So what I've done with it is I put it through an algorithm that puts snow on top of it, and then takes away the mass of the snow from the mass of the sculpture. So it's carved in marble, and it's much smaller than the originals. But the idea is that when it's put outside, it's only ever complete as the form it was intended to be when it snows for a certain amount of time at a certain velocity. So it's almost like a sculpture that never ends. That's why it's called Shapeless Endeavor. I quite like there's that weird circle in it, isn't there? That, we try to change. Humans have a lot of effect on natural cycles of the planet, obviously. And we try to shape and change the world around us, but there's no escaping, the energy that the earth has, and that we just put small pieces in that big puzzle.
And quite a comment on climate change and rising tides and everything else. And
it is, but I didn't want to say that because I always get a little bit. No, it's fine. You can say what you want.
I said that. I had to say the obvious, didn't I?
Yeah, no. It's just that's the beauty of art, that everybody has multiple interpretations. I think that's what I love about art. I appreciate art where lots of people can have lots of different perspectives on it. I just feel like that if I talk about climate change, I'm jumping on the bandwagon and grasping for attention, and I don't like to get involved in that whole.
Okay, well,
So
we'll pass over that. But you live on the coast, and you live on a coast that I know well, and the tides come up very high on that coast.
Well, we see the sea, you know, almost every day. So it's something that I'm a little preoccupied with. This is
lockdown. So tell us about this one.
This one's interesting because obviously when I make a show, there's a gallery here at the studio in Suffolk where I try things out and we photograph them. But usually I don't live with the art that much. You know, we make it and we put it up and we photograph it, and maybe it's installed for 2 or 3 days, but I don't live with it. But the weird thing about this figurative sculpture is that because of lockdown and the situation, I lived with the art that I'd made longer than I've lived with an artwork that I've made for possibly the last 10 years, which is such a weird thing for me. He's a drama student. They're called bit part players. He's made of solid graphite. So we call him Pencil Man. But basically he's like the lead in a pencil. So if you touch him, you get the graphite on you. And the way that he's installed, you know, a lot of my work is obviously about time and the consequences of time and effect, and the privilege of hindsight, the idea that we all view our lives imaginatively. We project ourselves into the future, imagine what can be, and we remember our lives the way they've been, and sometimes regret, and, you know, would love the privilege of hindsight in some parts of our lives. So effectively, he's like a bit of a conceptual, I mean, it's figurative sculpture, but he's a conceptual illustration of this idea that the consequences of our being leave traces in the world around us. And here it's in a very, you know, it's basically, he's a drawing. He's a figurative sculpture that makes drawings through the consequences and the accidents of happenstance of walking through life. But the study of the actual person who the sculpture is of, he's also an actor. So he's called a bit part player. A bit part player in acting culture is usually a young actor or actress that is an understudy or has a very tiny part. So, you know, in Shakespeare, you sometimes get a character that will walk on for like a minute and they'll just say, "Yes, milady," or "Yes, my lord," and then they'll go. And that will be their whole line for the entire show. And that's how actors often start. They're called bit parts because they're bit parts.
And then
so,
next time you see them, they're playing Hamlet.
Well, hopefully, if they do well, that's the plan. Yeah.
We can't tell the scale. Is this life size?
Yeah, it's life size.
It's life size. Oh, well, it's fantastically interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So now, I think we're going straight on to Simon Fujiwara, a British-Japanese artist who you live and work in Berlin, is that right?
I do, and that's where I am now. Yeah.
Good. So yet another zone. It's really nice that we can all meet each other across these borders. Tell us about this extraordinary, beautiful chandelier.
This is actually a work I made just before lockdown. It was when Corona was just starting up, and it was this myth that was something happening in China. And actually, this comes from a series of works that I made when I had syphilis, and I was suffering from syphilis and for most of last year, but only found out in December. And the treatment was quite hardcore. I was in the late second stage. There's 3 stages to syphilis, and the 3rd stage is when you go crazy. Oh my God, I haven't heard of that since the Romantic Poets. Well, that's the thing, is it's had a major revival in Berlin, where it's the center of the revival of the syphilis epidemic, because, because of PrEP, which is a drug that is used to prevent the transmission of HIV. And a lot of gay men are taking PrEP, and that means you can have unprotected sex, but it also means that it doesn't stop other diseases happening. And so syphilis, which I also thought didn't exist anymore, has had a major return. And that was kind of December. And so I made a whole exhibition around that, in which I was kind of looking at the history of the whole epidemic and how it actually is believed to have originated in the ships of Christopher Columbus. It's supposed to have been brought back from the Americas, which is a very neat colonialist narrative.
Yes, it is.
And then
we didn't have that until they brought it in.
No. And then it exploded in Naples in the 1400s. And then I was tracing the kind of whole history of it leading to my infection as a kind of genealogy, almost like a family tree through the disease. And then kind of went through a process of turning it into a fantasy story, because there's lots of imagery around. I mean, the work that you're seeing is called Pink Panther versus the Pope, and it's Pink Panther kind of taking over the Sistine Chapel. The sides are etched Vatican facades. And so a lot of the show was about overthrowing authorities and sexuality kind of invading and infecting the world. And then the show opened, and then a week later, lockdown happened and it was closed. So it was just comical going from one epidemic into a pandemic. And then the next series of works, one is a collage, which you're looking at now, and the other three are drawings. And I started to draw I think a lot of artists have been going back to basics and drawing. It's something I did a lot earlier, and then stopped because I was really excited about collaborating in production with different kind of people. And when I started to draw, I was thinking about, everyone stopped flying. I sort of went to level 1 million and went like, okay, this is the end of traveling. This is the end of production. This is the end of meeting people. This is possibly the end of capitalism, which means the end of galleries, which means the end of museums. Does this mean the end of being an artist? And it was that kind of philosophical question of like, if I call myself an artist, what will I make when there's no one to talk to about it or show? And so I took that to kind of an extreme and went, well, I would draw, and what will there be kind of at the end of the world to draw with? And I was like, there's going to be burned trees, I guess. So I started drawing with charcoal, and spent a lot of time doing really awful, embarrassing drawings to kind of like exorcise everything that was in me. And then later just started to make these collages that are mixtures of things that I was seeing on the news and drawing over them with charcoal. And I mean, I'm using a lot of fairy tale language and characters like Pink Panther or J.K. Rowling or Beauty and the Beast you saw in one of the collages, and they're all things that there's a baby from The Simpsons in which an episode where they're adopting away a child, and I was kind of using these. I think I was going into this childhood regressive phase in the way that I think everyone else was like baking banana bread. I think my version of regression was like drawing cartoons. And I was really interested in the way that things rose to the top of importance and other things became irrelevant during the time of the early kind of Corona moment. And of course, when you're an artist, you then go like, well, I'm not a key worker and I'm not like saving anyone's life. So what is the relevance of what I'm doing? And so I started to look at like the most irrelevant things, I guess. And one of them is, you could say, entertainment or fantasy, like as that's in the kind of capitalist structure. I was looking at things like disaster modeling in terms of what other tragedies have happened and how has that affected the least important sectors. So one thing I was looking at was how the Fukushima nuclear reactor affected Tokyo Disneyland, for example. Like how long did it take for them to reopen? What was damaged? How did people react? And people just went back to Disneyland like in droves, you know, because they were they were desperate for fantasy after all of the hardships and the sadness that was happening. And that kind of led me to think really about how important and valuable fantasy is, and how, you know, it's obviously not a key worker job, but that everything holds some kind of value in this system, and how even the lockdown was being kind of constantly related to fantastical situations, like, you know, this NHS savior. When people started to celebrate the NHS, which has been completely ignored, you know, then there was hundreds of drawings of them as superheroes, and that, you know, we go from this extreme of like of totally ignoring something, but then we can look at it when it is like entertaining and fantastical. So I started using these characters to talk about, to have a conversation with, essentially. And, you know, every time I'd watch the news or be annoyed with something, I'd be like, okay, what does Pink Panther think about this? And then Pink Panther would be interested in a specific way, or you know, there were two previous works that were around the J.K. Rowling Harry Potter scandal, where J.K. Rowling was saying allegedly transphobic comments. And I have all these props and toys in my studio, so I just started to print out the kind of anti J.K. Rowling banners, and I love the way that people were saying like trans wizards are wizards, and taking this into a fantastical realm. Or in the previous slide, I just made a magic book, which kind of shows, sorry, the previous one to this, is a book which shows a relationship of Beauty and the Beast. It's not this one. I don't know where the slide is gone, actually.
Not sure it's gone. Well, there's so much there we can pick up on later.
I'll finish now. But,
so much to pick up on, and I want to ask you in a minute about all the religious references as well. But just before we do that, let's turn to Sadie. Hello, Sadie. Are you there?
I am. Hi.
Oh, hi. Oh, hi, Sadie. Sorry. For a minute, I couldn't see you. So, Sadie, you were born in California and you live and work in Oakland. Is that where you are talking to us from today?
It is.
Oh, and it's very early in the morning. I'm glad you've had at least your cup of tea. Thanks for joining us. And you're showing with Jessica Silverman Gallery. And there are these fascinating works which I've been looking at with a lot of interest, which I believe is a project that centers around your own father and his run-ins with the law and his life. Tell us more about what we're seeing here.
Yes, and thank you for having me. This project is really a re-engagement with a project I've been working on for a few years now. A lot of my work has to do with my family history as kind of a container for American history, intersections with international history, as well as using my family to kind of look at ways that we take care of each other and protect each other and love each other. This project, it draws directly from a large FBI file that was amassed on my father in the 1960s and 70s during his time and because of his involvement with the Black Panther Party in Los Angeles and his work to free Angela Davis during her imprisonment up here in the Bay Area. And so because of his activism, he was surveilled by our government. And the word surveillance, you know, can sound a bit banal or passive, like, oh, it's just, you know, casual observations. But what we found contained in this 500-page document was much more than simply surveillance. It was harassment, it was intimidation. He was fired from his job at the post office. It was, you know, agent provocateurs. And so really what I felt was my kind of honor, my duty, my inheritance was to reclaim this information and use it to tell my father's story, which is also so many other families' stories in this country, many of whom, you know, haven't fared as well as my father, who is, you know, still with us today and able to share these stories. But many families at that time were ripped apart. We still have, you know, political prisoners incarcerated today, even as we sort of celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Panthers, and some degree of public opinion has shifted, but there's still, you know, real life stakes, real life consequences. But the process of drawing, I think, was, you know, similarly that has been mentioned, was something that I returned to during this lockdown moment. Of course, I wasn't necessarily making things right away. I think there was a certain level of needing to feel the kind of collective grief and anxiety and pause and slow down. In the beginning of the shutdown, I really wasn't posting a lot. I wasn't making a lot. I wasn't, you know, purporting to have answers. I was just really trying to listen and be still and be present, and kind of witness, which I often think about as my sort of way of engaging as an artist. So what you're looking at here, just to kind of explain how these are drawings, the FBI document drawings, which I believe you had 2 or 3 of in the beginning, like this one here, are 60 inches by 48 inches. So they're taking, you know, what's a small document, kind of blowing it up, inverting it, trying to somehow kind of retroactively put some healing and protection around my father and these young activists, while also, you know, claiming space with this large labored over graphite surface. So these are powdered graphite on white paper with these real kind of opposites in tension. And you can see this one is kind of being overrun by these Hello Kitties, which, you know, in thinking of this father-daughter kind of dialogue, using, you know, maybe what weapons might be at my disposal, which in this case would be like a Hello Kitty becoming a type of people's army and counter surveillance. This particular document is talking about the FBI passing around the Black Panther newspaper, which anyone that's familiar with the Black Panther Party knows how central the newspaper and media and imagery was in their organizing efforts.
A remarkable one. I think there's one more. Yeah, there's that one. And then, yeah, so tell us quickly about this one. Is this your family?
Yeah, so this is a photograph actually taken in my father's apartment around the time that this surveillance was being collected, implemented. And to me, one of the things that I love so much is the care and attention that he has put into making this beautiful domestic space. So he's got this amazing, you know, 70s wallpaper, this aqua blue lamp and the carpet with, you know, the lush ferns. And so just thinking about, you know, the interior domestic space of this kind of Black life, while so much is unfolding in the streets and publicly, there are these moments of beauty and care and, you know, homemaking that are happening within the house. And so that's actually my father in the very back. You can't see his face because my cousin Malik is sitting directly in front of him, but I just love that there's kind of this presence of, you know, an adult figure, but you can't see him, and you just have these young figures in the front, and this real kind of tender family moment where they're eating salads in this sunlit 70s home.
Yeah. No, it's a really, really powerful and evocative image. Thank you so much. That's wonderful. Well, thank you all for sharing your work and for telling us about it. And such an amazing range there. Some fantastic themes have come up. I think that artists I've talked to over this time have roughly divided into, I'm going to say, 3 groups. First group thinking, wow, this is amazing. I've got all this amazing unlooked for quiet time, and I'm going to get on with what I was doing anyway. Group 2 thinking these extraordinary things are happening in the world and I have to respond to them, and I'm going to make work in response. Group 3 kind of paralyzed with fear and anxiety, and I know that it hasn't been a great time for everybody, and we can't pretend that everyone's had an easy time. Obviously, all 4 of you have had a fantastically creative time in your different ways. But on the subject of time, I know, Ryan, you said that this was your, in a way, your biggest theme, perhaps. But I think that for everybody, maybe all of us, in whatever sphere we live, one of the things about lockdown was that it made us think completely differently about time. And I wondered whether any of you would like to talk a little bit about what that meant to you as artists, what it gave you, what was hard, what was good, what was...
I think that...
You're nodding.
I think that it's not just time. I think, time is a obvious value in a system of values. And I think it's more values that have been looked at differently. And like Simon said earlier about will this be the end of capitalism? Will this be the end of the art world? I thought that was really interesting, because obviously money is in that value system, but we also know that attention, the economy of attention, is also part of a great value system. Maybe attention is a greater currency than money now. And I think what the excess of time has done for me, at least, and people that I've chatted to about it, is that it's given us the ability to have perspective on the way we waste time. I mean, when I use the word time, I said to someone last night that when I use the word time, I always use it in a negative sense. I'm always running out of time, or I haven't got enough time, or I wish I had more time. And I think it's given us perspective on, we're all going to die. This is very depressing. We know this because we're human. We are all going to die, and time will run out for us. So, someone who writes about this a lot, who I met, a social scientist, said to me, if you had 5 days to live, would you spend it on Instagram? And I think that really summed up attention economy for me. So I've been thinking about the way artists use their time, but also the way artists need to be ethical and moral about the attention that they demand from people. And so when I said earlier, I didn't want to use the words environmental art, similarly, I guess I'm in group 2. I think it was your group 2. I think your group 2 was people, I'm not in your group 2, people that responded.
You're not. Okay, you're not.
Because for me, it was like, I saw 100,000 artists responding to this moment. And I mean, my understanding of art is that we should look in the deepest, darkest corners of society for new stuff, like adventurers. So for me to respond to something that is immediate in front of my face isn't the way. Obviously, some people work like that, and that's fine, but it's not the way that I work. So I guess I was in not 2, but the group between 1 and 3, half paralyzed with fear, and half trying to be brave and optimistic, but I don't know if I have been.
There might be very many more groups. You can be in a group all of your own, by the way.
Number 4, I think it was in number 4.
Ebony, the attention economy, does that feel very different from Jamaica?
I don't, I mean, to be honest, I mean, when lockdown started happening in Chicago, I like up to that point, I was still, I come off like Facebook a few years ago, and Instagram was actually the only place that I was on. And so it was interesting to watch this kind of performativity of production, which I found incredibly anxiety riddling. So I found that people would either keep posting what they were showing, or if they weren't showing, if they weren't making, you could see that there was this concern about not being seen. So they would do like throwback posts, throwback to when I did this show, throwback to when I did that show. And then I think the last image I ended up posting was me setting up a studio in my apartment, and then I just disappeared. I've not been on Instagram or any social media platform, I think since the end of March, early April. And it's the best decision I ever made. And I made it for my mental health, because the very thing that's meant to bring us closer together in this moment only seemed to, it didn't feel close at all. And in fact, I was really concerned, especially with the closing of borders, what that would mean for me being able to access my mother, you know? So it's not enough that I can pick up the phone, call her, and have a video chat. Just the notion that I will not be able to, that there's this upending time, and not knowing when that time would come, my inability to touch and see and smell her was a real problem. And then in addition to that, you know, I haven't been living in Chicago for very long. I was in Kentucky before for 12 years, in Lexington, Kentucky. And so in that place, I felt a great sense of isolation. And then I moved to this bigger city, you know, like feeling like somehow that would shift. But then here it is, we have a lockdown where we're told we have to remain isolated again. So I felt like all of these anxieties about being in isolation just became even more heightened. So I was very aware of, I was even more aware of the absence of touch. So like you go to the supermarket, nobody would pack the bag for you so that you'd have the, you know, just the, you know, the occasional touch of somebody else's hand. Now you had to do that for yourself, and the possibility of touching a stranger, that also became very anxiety riddled for me. So I find
Absolutely.
that so I was very aware of all of these absences, and I tend to hold, and so I wasn't able to make very much. Sometimes I made something, sometimes I didn't make anything, and I felt really guilty for a long time about not being able to make. And then it made me think about like how much we're, you know, like how much capitalism has totally screwed us up in terms of the way we think about production. You know, so speaking to what Simon and Ryan both said, but just the idea of stopping, or the notion of stopping being equated with being unproductive and therefore lazy, that rest is important. And so I found that when I finally accepted rest, I was sleeping a lot. I didn't realize how tired my body was, right? And then what else does one do? Because, you know, then you start cooking for yourself, and then you start to realize how much, you know, like how much care you weren't giving to yourself. And another reason I just also found it difficult to also make is that this is it's a traumatic moment that we're all experiencing collectively. And then so much of my work is grounded in exploring or in unpacking trauma. So what does it mean then to make work that deals with these things fundamentally, and then to sit in a collective trauma, and to witness it all together? So I had to stop and carve space. And I have to say,
Thanks so much for sharing all that. Sadie, collective trauma, collective anxiety, has it affected you?
Yes, I, as you mentioned, I'm in California, right? So in addition to the coronavirus pandemic, we've been experiencing wildfires. So you're in this moment where you're supposed to be, you know, if you're meeting up with people, meeting up outside because fresh air, you know, is safer as far as the virus. And then all of a sudden, you can't breathe the air because of smoke. People are being evacuated from their homes. Not to mention, you know, for me, I think of this, you know, past 6 months really in two parts. I think of before the murder, very public murder of George Floyd, and after. And I think one of the reasons why that was so felt so strongly, so collectively, is because, you know, with the pandemic, we're in this moment where everybody is trying to save lives. Like, we've agreed that life, however complicated and messed up and different it is, it's worth saving, it's worth fighting for. And, you know, healthcare workers are risking their lives. People are running around trying to make these little impromptu masks, and we're really coming together to try to save lives. And then you see this police officer just so easily snuff out a life, like a whole life.
Have you been able to work? Have you been able to make work through this, or has it been too hard?
I mean, I'm always making work, whether it's just looking, thinking, writing, feeling, you know, saving ideas. But with that moment, and you know, it's kind of a reassertion of everything that I, you know, have been fighting for, that my family and ancestors have been fighting for. So yeah, you know, you make work, you show up, you do your part in whatever way is best aligned with what you can offer. I definitely realized that, you know, being an artist is just truly who I am, and it's how I engage with the world. And so I have been able to make work. I've been very fortunate, you know, to still have access to my studio, and of course, acknowledging that a lot of people are in circumstances where, you know, the question of like whether you've been able to make something isn't even relevant, because they're just trying to survive, just trying to get food on the table, just trying to, you know, wrangle kids and, you know, put one foot in front of the other. So yeah, I've been making things. I feel really lucky to be making work and to be showing work, and it feels different on different days, you know, whether it's to be in conversation with people, whether it's to, you know, contribute to a conversation, or whether it's just to do something with your hands and keep yourself busy in order to kind of stay grounded and try to find, you know, some peace.
Well, thank you for that. Simon, your t-shirt says neurotic. Has the neurotic stress of this situation affected your work? Have you made different work because of it?
I've been very optimistic, actually. And part of it has been like seeing all of the awful things that Corona laid bare, but actually being able to see those structures and hear people acknowledge them has been like incredibly refreshing, first of all. When, you know, everything before has just been like lies, lies, lies. And there are plenty of lies still in the coronavirus, but there's some truths coming out. And then seeing the Black Lives Matter and everything that kind of correlated with that has made me really look back through the structures of my life. And, you know, I'm optimistic because I've only ever seen like the possibilities for myself, seen through like a racial lens, or seen through like the lens of capitalism, improve in my lifetime. Because you know, I'm gay, I'm not white, and when I grew up in this village, I was like, there's no future for me. I don't see anything like me, and I never am. And, you know, it was like seeing music videos in the diversity 90s in Britain, which people say, oh, it's so sad how there was a token this or that. You know, I was glued to the television if I saw an Asian person in the background of a video. So, you know, I was so excited. And then to see the revolution of like gay people being accepted like in the mainstream, I've just seen life get better and better for like my very specific demographic. And one of the things that brought me kind of to tears actually in the Black Lives Matter was seeing so many white people at demonstrations for once. Yeah. And I just had never really spoken to white people about race. There's never really been a point or an interest. And I'm living in a very white country, which is Germany. And there's just so much more to do, but just to see something beginning even is just so shocking. It's just so shocking to me. So I've seen like steps from my very like low position of very low expectations, I would say, I guess, of improvements around me. And that sort of fortified me in a sense to, you know, keep talking about these things and keep talking to people around me, because the conversation is on the table now, and it's much more mainstream. And it wasn't just like this weird thing that I'd be bringing up, you know, because of course I'm an artist that works in this very white art world, and I think people think I'm white often, you know, because I'm kind of like white passing, except
bad luck. Bad luck.
And so I think there's just
this
like
sounds really optimistic, quite an optimistic message, as if this has been quite an eye-opening. Well,
it's, I mean, I don't really have an idea about society as a whole. I just see it as I can't, you know, really see it or pretend to know anything other than from my perspective and what I see. And so when we were talking about social media earlier, I've relied on media my whole life to see people like me. If there wasn't media, magazines or television, like I would never have known it would be possible. And so I've got a kind of like a loving relationship towards Instagram, even just because of the ability to then see so many other kinds of people going through the experiences of Corona, from like refugees to aid organizations to influencers to people of other genders, transgender, other races. It's just like, but it's completely overwhelming, which I understand. I think that, and I think I've got a compulsive obsession with images, almost anthropologically, but making these works where I was using another image or a cartoon to talk about those images as a placeholder, was somehow dealing with this this feeling of also social media does cartoonify everything. You know, it simplifies everything. Yeah. Well,
unfortunately we've got so little time left, which is terrible. But I've got a whole raft of lovely questions and comments. You'd probably like to know that comments are coming in from Sao Paulo in Brazil, from Uruguay, from don't know where. One audience member just says, this virtual exhibition is amazing, great work from all these thoughtful, reflective artists, thank you. So that's really nice. There's a question here that is actually addressed to Ebony, but it could be for any or all of you. It says, how do you ideate to create your work? Has it changed due to the lockdown world, and does it allow you to focus more? And that's from Ken in Ottawa in Canada. I'm just going to give you different questions and then you can pile in and answer them as you like. Hi Sadie, was the photograph taken by Intel or family member? Another one says, these artists are very creative, very inspired to share their emotions, absolutely. And then there's a question about realism and whether realism has become more important during this time. So there's loads to talk about there. Anybody can pick up on anything they like. So we could actually, for all of us, we only have 5 minutes, I'm so sorry, but we could pick up on the realism question, realism and surrealism, whether this situation has caused any of you to think more about the way in which you make images of the world around you, or the way in which those images are translated into metaphorical work or surrealistic work, perhaps. Ryan, you've got a smile on your face.
No, do you know what I was
my
thinking?
impression
I was
is that
thinking,
it hasn't changed
God,
your
I
practice
hope
much.
I was thinking, God, I hope she doesn't ask me this question, because
All right.
I have
I won't
no idea what she's on about.
Okay. All right. No idea what she's on about. Yeah. Well, anyone. Ebony, I know that during this time you've been making extensions of some of the series that you did before, right? But adapting them a little bit to different.
I mean, I guess when I have been able to make, I've just been, I mean, the way I make typically is that everything is a problem and I'm looking for the moments in the last problem. Every work is a problem and I'm looking for the moments of, you know, where something wasn't resolved to start the next thing. And so that's essentially how I begin making things for the most part. I always see it as the same thread that just gets turned over and over again. But I also think, I mean, it's really interesting the kind of expectations that I think from the beginning of this moment about you know, oh, what a great time this must be for artists in terms of their ability to produce. Oh, I can't wait to see, you know, I mean, artists are people too. And we're experiencing the moment like everybody else. And that is varied. You know, some of us will, you know, like, we'll see this as an ongoing fountain, and some of us, you know, will not.
Right. So too many expectations, maybe. Sadie, we're really running out of time, but give me a really short answer, like a 30-second answer.
Sure, we'll just...
Realism, surrealism, I mean, response to what's out there, has it actually changed? Has it actually changed the way that you see your practice, or that you might see your practice in the future? I haven't really had time to get onto the future, sadly.
All right. Well, to briefly answer the question about the photograph,
whether
it was taken by an agent, no, it's a family photograph, and it's really important to me that you know, our own voice and perspective is always in there, kind of in contrast to this very flattened state surveillance portrayal of lives. I don't think that, you know, anything about my practice has changed, except maybe more time and space to recommit to it. But I think, you know, we're all fairly committed and entrenched in the way that we make. I don't even know if it always feels like a choice. And I think I'm looking at kind of a longer arc than just this moment, this year. I think I work slower and have, you know, a lens that's thinking, you know, how will what I make now be looked at in 50 years? And I'm also always looking back 50 years. And so I think it's, you know, to me, important to slow down and kind of step back.
That's great. So the real impact of what's happened in 2020 might be felt through the arts for a long, long time to come. Simon, can I give you literally 30 seconds? I'm so sorry, we have to end. It's really sad.
I think there's, I mean, it's pretty obvious how I'm dealing with reality, and I've sort of stated it quite clearly, but I think there's some interesting connections. Like, one of the things I see with Sadie's work is, like, it's obviously, you know, this quite hardcore, they're real documents, and they're unequivocally, they're beautifully presented. And I love the way you're putting these Hello Kitty images over them, and there's this kind of tension between almost creating this like metaphorical world around it, at this need to convert something, and also with Ebony of like this idea of the metaphor of the garden. And I find that, like, I'm finding at this moment, like, the revival of, I've always been really, like, found narrative and storytelling like very problematic, and because of the way it's being used. But I'm really sort of finding a way back into it as but in a really clearly stated, like, fairy tale way, as almost like the only option to kind of deal with what already is like a weirdly fantastical year of, you know, stories that just don't seem like they could have ever, that we could have ever imagined them. So
well, they're magical images. Well, thank you so much. And I mean, very sadly, we're already out of time. Many, many thanks to everyone for joining us, and to those of you who submitted questions. If you'd like to revisit this talk, it'll soon be online on Art Basel's YouTube channel. And please do visit our social media channels for updates on the series. And finally, thank you to our wonderful panel. I would have talked to you for another 3 hours. Sadie, Simon, Ryan, Ebony. I'm sure everybody out there is applauding with me. I only wish you could hear it. Please visit Art Basel OVR 2020. Thank you so much, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.